The courtroom froze the instant the janitor shouted that he would defend the billionaire. For a heartbeat, the fluorescent lights hummed louder than the stunned crowd, as if the building itself held its breath. Then all eyes snapped toward the man, still gripping a dripping mop, a man no one had ever truly seen, until this moment. Daniel Hayes. It was early morning in the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago, the kind of cold autumn morning where the wind cut through coats and confidence alike. Reporters squeezed behind velvet ropes. Attorneys from the city's most elite firms whispered in polished accents. The trial of Claire Whitman, tech magnate and founder of Quantum Apex, was set to begin. She was 37, impossibly composed on the outside, yet her blue-gray eyes betrayed the exhaustion of someone who had not slept in days. What should have been 6 chairs for her legal team sat empty, a row of accusation in itself. They had vanished, abandoned her, left her defenseless in a case that could destroy her career and, more dangerously, her credibility. She had called them again and again until her fingers trembled, but nothing but silence answered. Every unanswered ring sliced her hope thinner. Prosecutor Lauren King rose like a blade, her voice smooth, cold, rehearsed. She requested a default judgment declaring the defense had effectively collapsed. Claire's breath hitched. Around her, the machinery of the law shifted toward crushing her, indifferent and merciless. She felt alone in a way wealth could not cure, a loneliness that seemed to echo through the marble columns above her. She braced herself for the gavel that would end everything. And then Daniel spoke. His voice cracked through the tension like a lightning bolt splitting a dark sky. "I will defend her." It was not loud, but it carried a strange, anchoring force. The kind of force that came not from confidence, but from conviction born out of surviving something worse. The room erupted into confused laughter. A janitor, a man in a worn Navy uniform with cleaning gloves hooked to his belt, a man who looked to them like the definition of insignificance. But Daniel did not flinch. He simply set his mop aside as though setting down the last piece of a life he had accepted too quietly for too long. For 15 years, he had been invisible, walking the halls before dawn, sweeping the floors of courtrooms where legends argued and verdicts carved futures. No one noticed the quiet man with the graying hair, the lined face, the tired eyes. No one asked who he used to be. Cham Fawn Helen Porter stared at him, astonished and slightly irritated. "Who are you?" Her words sliced through the murmuring gallery. Daniel reached into his worn wallet without breaking her gaze and pulled out a bar card, the edges softened from years of being carried, but unused. "My name is Daniel Hayes, Your Honor. I was admitted to the Illinois bar for 18 years. The room stilled again. The laughter caught in throats. Even Lauren King blinked, her confidence wobbling for the first time. Claire turned toward him, studying the man she had passed countless times without a second glance. There was something in his eyes she did not expect, not desperation, not arrogance, but a deep, steady resolve. The kind people carry only when they have lost everything except their principles. Her chest tightened with a small, fragile flicker of hope. Judge Porter examined the card, her expression shifting almost imperceptibly. "How long since you practiced?" Daniel answered with quiet honesty. 15 years. The number fell into the silence with the weight of a confession. A lawyer who had vanished for over a decade. A man who now scrubbed floors to survive. A man who still dared to step forward now. "Do you believe you are competent to represent the defendant?" Judge Porter's tone made the question brutal. Daniel did not hesitate. "This woman deserves a defense," he said, voice steadying. "I know the law, I know procedure, and I know what justice is supposed to look like." Something inside Claire steadied too. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "I accept Mr. Hayes as my counsel." The gallery erupted. Shock, outrage, fascination. Reporters hammered keys like machine gun fire, desperate to capture the madness of this moment. The judge pressed her fingers to her temples and exhaled as if accepting fate more than agreeing with it. "You have 15 minutes to confer with your client, Mr. Hayes. No delays." Daniel walked up the aisle, shoulders squared, with a posture far too grounded for a janitor. Security barred him until the judge signaled approval. When he finally sat beside Claire, cameras clicked rapidly, immortalizing the strangest pairing the Chicago legal world had ever seen. Claire leaned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel answered without looking away from the prosecution table. "Because something about this is wrong. None of this is natural. And I have spent 15 years watching how the truth gets buried when no one is watching." She studied him. A stranger. An ally. A mystery wrapped in humility. She saw the tension in his jaw, the controlled breathing of someone forcing down old ghosts. For the first time since the scandal began, Claire felt the cold grip around her ribs loosen. When the clerk announced time was up, Daniel rose. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow: the scrape of his chair, the shifting weight of expectation in the room, the pressure of 15 lost years settling between his shoulder blades. He walked to the podium, aware that the world saw a janitor pretending to be a lawyer. But he also knew a secret no one else in that room had learned, yet he was not pretending. Not anymore. He began to speak, and the courtroom leaned in, ready to witness the beginning of a battle none of them had seen coming. 15 years earlier, before he became a shadow sweeping the courthouse floors, Daniel Hayes had been the kind of attorney whose name traveled through Chicago's legal circles like a rising flame. He once occupied a corner office, overlooking the river glass walls, catching the morning sun as if reflecting the future everyone expected him to claim. He was 31 then, brilliant, relentless, with a reputation for dissecting cases until truth lay bare and trembling. Judges respected him. Opposing counsel feared him. Firms competed to lure him. And at home, Sarah waited with warm eyes and gentle patience, while their daughter Emily toddled through the apartment, leaving tiny footprints of joy in every room. Daniel had once lived a life filled with promise. But promise is fragile, easily cracked by forces too powerful to see coming. Back then, he had taken on a case few attorneys dared to touch: a whistleblower suit against Titan Energy Corporation, a monstrous empire disguised in polished boardrooms and patriotic branding. A young engineer had come forward claiming Titan had concealed safety violations in one of its facilities. 3 workers were dead. Their families were drowning in grief and silence. And Titan, with its legion of lawyers and deep political reach, intended to bury the truth before it reached daylight. Daniel had felt something ignite in him when he heard the engineer speak, a sense of justice too fierce to ignore. He believed that with law and integrity, he could force a Titan to kneel. He was wrong. The closer he came to uncovering evidence of Titan's deceit, the more violently the world around him shifted. Files disappeared. Witnesses recanted with eyes full of fear. The engineer vanished, and one night, long after Sarah and Emily were asleep, Daniel returned to his office to find it: violated drawers pulled open, hard drives, missing case notes, replaced with forged documents designed to frame him as the fraud. He remembered standing in the middle of that broken office, breathing the sharp scent of betrayal, realizing someone had reached into his life and clenched it in a merciless fist. Within days, the headlines erupted. Attorney falsifies evidence. Hayes investigation collapses. Titan Energy vindicated. The bar suspended him. His firm abandoned him. Friends who once toasted him at rooftop bars avoided eye contact. Even strangers whispered when he passed. Guilt he did not deserve wormed its way into his home, poisoning every quiet moment. Sarah held his hands at night, telling him they would survive it together. But sickness came for her, soon after, swift and cruel. When cancer took her, Daniel wondered whether grief or humiliation had struck the first wound. The suspension turned to ruin. The mortgage consumed what savings they had. Emily was too young to understand why her father had changed from confident to hollow. When he finally found work again, it was not in a courtroom, but in the same courthouse he had once commanded, pushing a cleaning cart before sunrise, while suits brushed past him like he was air. Life had carved him down to bone and silence. Now, 15 years later, as he walked beside Claire Whitman, after agreeing to represent her in court, those memories pressed against him like old bruises. She had asked him to explain why he believed her case was orchestrated, why he had stepped in so fiercely without knowing her at all. He did not answer immediately. How could he explain that he recognized the scent of sabotage, the deliberate emptiness of abandoned defense chairs, the too perfect timing of her legal team's disappearance? Because he had once been smothered by those same invisible hands. They paused in a quiet hallway just outside the courtroom doors. Claire studied him cautiously, sensing the storm beneath his calm surface. She had built a future from science calculations logic, but this moment was something she could not quantify. Something about Daniel felt both fragile and indestructible at once. "What happened to you?" she asked softly, sensing the weight he carried. Daniel inhaled deeply, the air thick with dust and the ghosts of old trials. "What happened," he said, his voice low, "is that I trusted the system more than I should have. And I paid for it." He did not give her details. The pain felt too raw even after so many years. But Claire saw enough in his eyes. The loss, the wreckage, the unmistakable mark of a man who had been broken not once, but repeatedly. Inside his thoughts, Titan Energy's name pulsed like a scar that never healed. He did not yet know the full extent of how the past would twist itself into Claire's present, how their stories had been orbiting the same ruthless force. But he sensed something larger, moving in the shadows of her case, something calculated, something familiar enough to raise every instinct he thought he had buried. Outside, reporters were already waiting for her, cameras flashing like gunfire. They shouted questions about stolen technology, failing stock prices, vanishing lawyers, and the absurdity of trusting her entire defense to a janitor. Claire flinched. She felt the walls closing around her again, just as they had inside the courtroom. Daniel stepped slightly in front of her, a subtle, instinctive motion. Protective. Certain. It startled her. He did not look like a man with power, yet the gesture carried authority, the kind earned not through prestige, but through surviving storms no one else could imagine. As they walked through the crowd, Daniel felt eyes judging him, dismissing him as a curiosity, an amusing twist for headlines. But inside, something old began to stir. A sense of purpose he had not allowed himself to feel since the night Titan Energy dismantled his life. A quiet realization unfurled in him with unexpected force. He was not done. The law still lived in him, not as a profession, but as a calling that had waited in the dark for its moment to return. And Claire, overwhelmed and desperate, sensed it too. She did not just see a janitor. She saw a man with a lost destiny flickering back to life. A man who, for reasons she did not yet understand, might be the only person capable of saving her. They stepped through the courthouse doors into the bright, indifferent Chicago morning, each carrying their own fears, failures, and fragile hopes. Neither yet knew that their stories, once separate, had just collided with a force powerful enough to shake the foundations of everything they believed. By the time Claire Whitman stepped into the small consultation room beside the courtroom, her hands trembled so violently she had to clasp them together to hide it. The morning light filtering through the frosted glass seemed too bright, too sharp, as if exposing every fracture in her composure. She was a woman known to the world as a visionary, a founder, a billionaire, entrepreneur, who had built Quantum Apex from a matchbox apartment and a stubborn belief that science could change humanity's future. But now stripped of legal counsel and thrust into chaos, she felt like a scientist cornered in her own failed experiment. Daniel Hayes closed the door behind them and stood silently for a moment. He used silence deliberately, like a surgeon preparing to cut. Claire studied him, unsettled by the contradictions he embodied. He wore a janitor's uniform, still damp from a morning of mopping marble floors, yet his posture carried the gravity of someone who had once stood in rooms where verdicts shaped history. His eyes, dark and steady, held no arrogance, only a careful clinical calculation, as though he were already dissecting the case from every angle. "Tell me everything," he said, "not the public version, not the sanitized strategy you rehearsed for your former attorneys. The truth, exact, unfiltered. Start from the beginning." There was something about his voice, quiet, stripped of judgment, that made her obey. She took a steadying breath and began. 12 years earlier, she told him she had been fresh out of MIT, living on instant ramen and scribbling equations on cheap notebooks, obsessed with the idea of stabilizing quantum coherence without refrigerating qubits to near absolute zero. Everyone said it was impossible. Professors dismissed her. Investors laughed. But she saw a path, a way to use the natural instability of qubits rather than fight it, a way to turn fragility into function. She spent 6 years working alone, creating the first breakthroughs of Quantum Apex, without grants, without labs, without any support except sheer will. As she spoke, the tightness in her chest loosened for the first time in months. Daniel did not interrupt, did not question her credibility, did not doubt her genius. He simply listened, absorbing every detail with the intensity of a man reconstructing a crime scene from memory. But he also watched the way her voice faltered at certain parts and the way her eyes hardened at others. He was reading her, not just hearing her. 3 months ago, she continued, everything began to unravel. Nova Dynamics, a rising tech startup with suspiciously rapid funding, accused her of stealing their prototype designs. Overnight, the media turned on her. Partners withdrew. Employees hesitated to meet her eyes. And worst of all, her attorneys, the expensive, prestigious team from Barlow, Finch and Stone, told her the best strategy was to concede small points, avoid technical arguments, and hope the jury sympathized with her. Daniel stopped her there, his expression darkening. "That is not a strategy," he said. "That is surrender." Claire swallowed hard. That was exactly the feeling she had tried to ignore. He motioned for her to continue. She explained how the lawsuit seemed too perfectly coordinated, how Nova Dynamics had documents almost before she filed her patents, how their technical experts referenced materials that should have been confidential, how the press received insider information within minutes of any development. Most disturbing of all, she said, was the morning her legal team simply vanished. No calls, no emails, as if they had never existed. Daniel leaned back, the gears in his mind locking into place. He had seen patterns like this before. Coordinated pressure, engineered collapse, manufactured guilt. "What do you think is really happening?" she asked, desperate for anything resembling clarity. Daniel took a long breath before answering. "I think you are being set up with precision, the same kind of precision that destroyed my career 15 years ago. Someone wants your technology buried, not bought, not shared, buried. Claire stared at him, a slow horror tightening her spine. But why? Why go to such lengths? Because your work threatens something powerful, Daniel said. Something too big to fight openly. For a moment, Claire felt the room tilt around her. The idea that forces beyond Nova Dynamics were moving against her was terrifying. Yet, it explained the anomalies she had tried to rationalize for months. Daniel watched her absorb the revelation, watched fear twist with realization across her features. He softened his voice. Claire, I need you to understand something. Your attorneys did not withdraw because they panicked. They withdrew because someone made them. You were never meant to survive this trial. The words hit her like a blow to the sternum. The air left her lungs in a quiet gasp. She had always believed that the law, however flawed, would at least offer her a fair fight. She now understood how naive that belief had been. Tell me what to do, she whispered. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice to something steady grounding. First, we stay calm. Panic benefits them. Second, you hand me everything. Every note, every schematic, every internal email. I need the raw truth, not the version you curated for attorneys who were never on your side. Third, he paused. Under no circumstances do you react in court to anything I say unless I instruct you. They expect predictable defense patterns. We will give them unpredictability instead. Claire nodded, overwhelmed, yet anchored by the intensity of his certainty. Then she asked the question she had been afraid to voice. Why are you helping me? You do not know me. Daniel studied her for a long, quiet moment, and the past flickering behind his eyes like a movie played backward. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost raw. Because I know what it feels like to be crushed by a machine that pretends to be justice, and because I will not let it happen again. For the first time since the nightmare began, something warm spread through Claire's chest, hope, fragile but real. The clerk knocked on the door. Time's up. Together, they walked back into the courtroom. Claire felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, but beside her, Daniel moved with the quiet, deliberate confidence of a man reclaiming the life stolen from him. He stepped to the defense podium, and the room leaned in, sensing something had shifted, sensing that the janitor was no longer who they thought he was. And Claire, watching him, believed it too. Night settled over Lake Forest like a velvet curtain, heavy and quiet. But inside Claire Whitman's mansion, sleepless urgency pulsed beneath the polished floors. Daniel Hayes arrived in his faded Toyota just after midnight, the engine coughing as if protesting the long drive from his cramped apartment in West Chicago. He stepped out still wearing his janitor uniform, the fabric clinging to him, with the lingering scent of bleach and hallway dust. He looked painfully out of place amid the manicured hedges and the marble entryway, glowing under soft lights, yet he walked toward the door with a resolve that made the world around him seem secondary. A security guard escorted him through hallways lined with art worth more than Daniel's annual salary. Every step reminded him that he did not belong here. But Claire's situation mattered more than his discomfort. She met him in her office, dressed not in power, but in exhaustion. Her blazer discarded her hair, pulled back loosely, shadows under her eyes, revealing the toll of the trial and the betrayal she had endured. She handed him a cup of freshly brewed coffee from a machine that cost more than his monthly rent. He accepted it with a quiet nod, though he felt strangely out of place, lifting something so delicate in his calloused hands. "All right," Daniel said, setting the cup aside. "I need the real story now. Every detail. Everything you were too afraid or too pressured to admit to your former lawyers. Claire opened a safe hidden behind an abstract painting and took out a thick folder filled with handwritten notes, equations, diagrams, and early prototypes. She handed it to him with reverence, as if passing him a piece of her soul. "These are my original research documents," she said. "All dated, notarized, some even signed by advisors who dismissed me but agreed to validate my timeline. Proof I created this long before Nova Dynamics existed." Daniel flipped through the pages, slowly absorbing the brilliance and the labor etched into every line. Then his expression hardened. "Why did your legal team never present these?" "They told me it was unnecessary," Claire said quietly. "That they had a strategy more likely to persuade the jury." Daniel snapped the folder shut, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "That is not strategy. That is sabotage." Claire blinked, startled by the sudden intensity in his voice. Sabotage. The word echoed in her mind, aligning too perfectly with the unease she had been carrying for months. Her heart raced as she stepped closer. "You mean deliberately?" "Someone wanted me to lose." Daniel nodded slowly. "You asked me earlier how I recognized the pattern. This is why." He exhaled, the weight of old memories gathering at the edge of his voice. 15 years ago, Titan Energy planted falsified evidence in my office, framed me for fabricating documents, destroyed my career. Everything collapsed so fast, I did not even have time to understand what was happening. Claire felt a chill run through her. She had never pressed him about his past, but now she sensed the depth of what he carried, a grief that had carved itself into him silently. "What did you do?" she asked softly. "What I had to," he replied. "I cleaned floors. I survived. I watched justice unfold from the shadows, till I could stand inside a courtroom again without breaking." He hesitated, then added, "Titan Energy did not just ruin my career. My wife died during those years. Stress, sickness, burdens I could not lift. I lost her while fighting a battle I never chose." Claire's breath caught. She looked at him not as a rescuer or an unexpected ally, but as a man who had endured devastation and still found the strength to step forward for her. She placed a hand on the folder. "Then we are not just fighting for my company," she said. "We are fighting for you too." Daniel did not respond, but his silence carried more truth than words. They spent the next 3 hours analyzing documents, emails, internal memos, and prototypes, laying them across the wide oak table like pieces of an intricate conspiracy. Claire guided him through her technology, with the precision of a scientist, her voice growing stronger as she explained how the system stabilized qubits using fluctuating energy states, instead of attempting to suppress them. Daniel followed every detail, not as a physicist, but as a strategist searching for inconsistencies in Nova's claims for patterns, in the sabotage for shadows in the timeline. The deeper they looked, the clearer the picture became. Her former lawyers had ignored key evidence. Certain emails from Nova referenced documents Claire had never shared. Meeting transcripts showed moments where critical objections should have been raised, but were not. Every omission pointed to coordination, not incompetence. "This is deliberate." Daniel murmured, his brow furrowed. "Too clean, too controlled, no random missteps." Claire leaned over the table, her breath shaky. "So who did this? Who wants me destroyed?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "People who fear your work. People with power. People who benefit from energy systems staying exactly as they are." The implication struck her like a blow. "You think Titan Energy is involved?" "I think Titan never stopped doing what they did to me," Daniel said quietly. "They simply found a new target. You." For a long moment, Claire said nothing. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table, grounding herself. The realization that an entire corporate empire was hunting her made her feel small, exposed. But Daniel's presence beside her, calm and unflinching, pulled her back from panic. He glanced at the clock. "I need to get home soon," he said. "I have a shift in a few hours." Claire stared at him. "You are still working tonight." "I am your attorney," he said. "But I am also a janitor who needs to keep his job. Pro bono means no paycheck, Claire. And I still need to pay rent." Her chest tightened again, this time for a different reason. The difference between their worlds stood painfully clear. She had once thrown $6,000 an hour at elite lawyers without thinking. Daniel was risking everything for her without asking for anything in return. "Stay after your shift," she said. "Midnight. That is when we continue." Daniel nodded. Midnight is fine. When he finally stepped out into the cold night, Claire watched his car disappear down the long driveway, its taillights fading into darkness. For the first time since her world began to collapse, she felt something unfamiliar bloom inside her chest. Hope, not because she believed the battle would be easy, but because she had found someone who understood what it meant to lose everything, yet still rise and fight anyway. The small cafe in West Chicago smelled faintly of burnt coffee, and old frying oil, the kind of scent that clung to the walls and settled into clothes. It was a world far removed from the gleaming laboratories of Quantum Apex or the marble silence of the federal courthouse. Yet this cramped corner booth became the unlikely ground where the truth underlying Claire Whitman's downfall began to take shape. Claire sat stiffly, visibly trying not to draw attention in a space that felt too ordinary for someone used to power and precision. Daniel Hayes sat across from her, leaning slightly forward, hands clasped as if preparing for impact. His daughter, Emily Hayes, entered moments later, her laptop tucked under her arm, her expression sharpened by urgency. Emily had inherited Daniel's intensity, but mixed it with a modern confidence that came from growing up in a digital age. She slid into the booth, tapped her laptop awake, and without ceremony said, "I found something. Something very big." Claire straightened, her pulse quickening. Daniel felt his chest tighten, a forewarning stirring like a distant tremor. Emily lowered her voice. "I started by looking into Nova Dynamics, like you asked. On the surface, they look clean, suspiciously clean. They have no lawsuits, no controversies, no debt, and no real history. That alone is a red flag. Companies do not just spring into existence polished unless someone is working very hard to hide the dirt." She tapped the screen again, scrolling through dozens of corporate filings, shell company diagrams, ownership disclosures, and foreign entities registered in places people used when they wanted to disappear behind paperwork. Nova Dynamics is owned by a Delaware shell, she explained, and that shell is owned by a Cayman entity, and that entity is owned by Titan Energy Corporation. Claire froze. Daniel's stomach dropped, as if someone had punched straight into an old wound. Titan Energy. The name alone tightened his breath. Emily looked between them, piecing together their reactions. "Dad," she said slowly, "this is the same company that destroyed you, isn't it?" Daniel did not answer, but the tremor in his hands told Claire everything. Emily continued, the weight of the discovery sharpening her voice. Titan makes tens of billions a year off fossil fuel infrastructure. If Claire's quantum processor works, if it stabilizes energy states the way her papers suggest, the impact on energy storage is massive. It could reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Maybe not tomorrow. But within a decade or two, Titan would not survive. Claire pressed a hand to her chest, absorbing the magnitude of the revelation. She had always imagined her work as a breakthrough in computing and data systems. She had not realized its implications could ripple outward into global energy economics. Suddenly, the timeline sharpened in her mind. The press attacks, the lawsuit, the sudden funding that launched Nova Dynamics from obscurity, the strange discrepancies in her legal strategy. They were not coincidences. They were calculated moves orchestrated by a corporation with the resources to alter the trajectory of nations. Emily clicked open another window, displaying images of executives' political donations, travel logs, and leaked conference attendee lists. Titan Energy has connections to 3 major oil conglomerates, 2 defense contractors, and at least 3 members of the Energy and Commerce Committee. These people write legislation. They shape policy. If they want someone erased, they do not need bullets or bombs. They just use influence. Or, if needed, intimidation. Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. Are you saying they would sabotage my entire company? Emily nodded. And ruin your credibility, and manipulate the media, and pay off your lawyers. They already did half of that. Daniel exhaled a long, slow breath, the past returning with a force that made the room feel smaller. Titan Energy had once framed him, isolated him, destroyed everything he held dear. He had thought he had buried that part of his life. But now he saw clearly that the same machinery was being turned against Claire with even greater precision. Emily hesitated before speaking again. Her voice softened, tinged with something like shame. They know about me, too. Claire and Daniel looked up sharply. Emily swallowed. My boss texted me this morning. She said they are eliminating my position, effective immediately, no severance. My belongings will be mailed to me. Claire stared at her, horrified. Daniel's jaw tightened until the muscles in his face trembled. This is retaliation, Claire whispered. It has to be. Emily nodded. The timing is too perfect. They know I am digging. They want to scare me off. Daniel placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, his voice gentle but strained. I am sorry, Em. I never wanted you involved in my battles. Emily met his gaze with surprising steadiness. You did not pull me into anything, Dad. I chose this. Claire watched the two of them, struck by the strength that flowed between father and daughter, a strength forged in hardship and humility rather than privilege. But she also saw fear in Emily's eyes, a fear masked by determination. Emily tapped her laptop once more. One more thing. Nova Dynamics lists their CEO as Victor Kane, but Kane was previously a senior strategist at Titan Energy. He left 6 years ago, supposedly to pursue startup opportunities. But look at this. She enlarged a document showing confidential internal communications. Kane is still in contact with Titan board members, emails, financial transfers, private meetings. They are using Nova as a front. Everything inside Claire felt as if it were collapsing and locking into place at the same time. It was as though the shadows surrounding her life had suddenly shaped into a single, monstrous figure, familiar yet horrifying. Titan had targeted her, not because they wanted her technology, but because they feared it. Because she represented a threat to a century-old empire. Daniel leaned back, the weight of recognition crushing him. The pattern was identical to his past case, except this time the stakes were higher. They are coming at you the same way they came at me, he said softly, but stronger, and with more to lose. Claire felt the air thicken. The enormity of the battle ahead pressed against her ribs. But she also felt something else, rising beneath the fear. Anger, resolve, and a growing trust in the man sitting across from her. A man who had been underestimated, dismissed, and forgotten by the world, yet who carried inside him an unbreakable understanding of injustice. Daniel looked at Emily, then at Claire. His voice was low, steady, and sharpened by a promise he had made long ago. Then we fight this together, all of us. Claire nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Together. None of them knew it yet, but this small cafe with its peeling paint and flickering lights had just become the place where a war would begin. One that would shake the foundations of power, expose buried conspiracies, and resurrect a man who had once been destroyed by the very forces he now vowed to bring down. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the front gate of Claire Whitman's estate buzzed unexpectedly, its metallic hum slicing through the quiet of the mansion like a warning note. Claire, exhausted from hours of reviewing documents with Daniel, and Emily had been drifting into a restless half-sleep when her head of security, Sam Rodriguez, contacted her with a tight, controlled voice. "Someone is here. Says she needs to see you. Alone?" The cameras showed a figure standing beneath a soft pool of light, from the gate lamp trembling, as though the cold night air had teeth. When Sam escorted the woman inside, Claire's breath caught. Olivia Brooks, her chief operating officer, her most trusted second-in-command, looked nothing like the polished executive who had stood at her side through board meetings and product launches. Her blazer was wrinkled, her mascara streaked with tears, and her hands shook so violently that Sam kept a steadying arm near her. The sight alone sent a shiver of dread through Claire. Olivia had never appeared anything but composed. "I am so sorry," Olivia whispered before Claire could speak. "I am so sorry." The words tumbled out too quickly, her voice cracking under their weight. Claire exchanged a glance with Daniel, who stepped closer, but said nothing, sensing the confession gathering in the air like a brewing storm. "What did you do, Olivia?" Claire said softly, though her pulse hammered with unease. Olivia's face crumpled. "Everything. I did everything they asked. Because I was scared. Because they threatened me." Her hands covered her face as sobs ripped through her uncontrolled and raw. Claire felt the room narrow, squeezing around her as fear and disbelief twisted together. Who threatened you?" "Victor Kane," Olivia whispered, "CEO of Nova Dynamics. But it is not really Nova. It is Titan energy behind it all. They sent him. He came to me 6 months ago. He knew about my past." Claire frowned, confused. Olivia lifted her red-rimmed eyes and forced out the truth. 10 years ago, before you hired me, I embezzled $50,000 from my old company. They never pressed charges, and I paid it back quietly. I thought it was over. But Kane had the records. He had everything. Emails, bank statements. He said if I did not do what he asked, he would turn it all in. I would go to prison. I would lose everything. Claire felt something inside her twist sharply. Olivia had been with her through 5 brutal years of growing quantum apex, through nights of fear and exhaustion. She had trusted her. And now here she was, unraveling in front of her like a broken thread. "What did he make you do?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. Olivia turned toward him, guilt soaking her every word. "I copied files, internal research, strategy documents, prototypes. I gave him information about Claire's patent filing schedule. I told him which employees were loyal, which ones had doubts. I even planted altered data in a few of the files to make it seem like Claire had accessed Nova's research illegally." Claire felt the floor tilt beneath her. She braced a hand on the desk to steady herself. Daniel's eyes narrowed, understanding, cutting through him like a blade. "Fabricated overlap evidence," he said. "Exactly what they did to me 15 years ago." Olivia nodded, tears falling harder. "But tonight, I overheard Kane on a phone call. He was angry. He said that if the court route failed, Titan would use a permanent solution. He said Claire was too dangerous to let live." Claire stiffened. The room fell cold, as if the walls themselves recoiled. Olivia reached into her pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out a sleek, expensive phone. This is Kane's phone. I stole it from his office before they noticed. It has everything. Calls, emails, messages. They recorded meetings. They documented orders. I took it and came straight here. Daniel took the phone as though holding a live explosive. His jaw clenched. "This is enough to dismantle an empire," he murmured, "or to put a target on all our backs." Emily stepped closer, steady and fierce despite the fear flickering in her eyes. "Give it to me. I can copy everything onto an encrypted server in 15 minutes. Olivia stared at her with trembling hope. "Will they find me? Will they hurt me?" Daniel answered before Claire could. "You need to disappear. Tonight. Do not go home. Do not pack. Leave now. Do you have somewhere safe?" Olivia nodded weakly. "My sister in Canada. I can get there by morning if I hurry." "Then go," Daniel said. "We will handle the rest." When the data transfer finished, Claire walked Olivia to the door. For a moment, the two women who had built so much together simply looked at each other, one drowning in guilt, the other struggling against betrayal. "I trusted you," Claire whispered. "I trusted you with everything." Olivia's voice broke. "And I betrayed you. But I am trying to fix it. Please believe that." And Claire, though wounded and wary, nodded once. Courage can come from unlikely places, even from those who failed. As the taxi carrying Olivia disappeared into the darkness, Daniel stood beside Claire and Emily beneath the soft glow of the porch light. He held Kane's phone in his hand like a ticking fuse. "Now we know the truth," he said quietly. "And they know we have it." The night suddenly felt much darker and far more dangerous. Dawn had not yet touched the horizon when the first alarm shattered the silence of Claire Whitman's estate. A piercing mechanical wail rippled through the mansion, echoing off stone and glass like a scream torn from the bones of the house itself. Claire jolted awake in her room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Down the halls, Emily Hayes stumbled out of the guest suite disoriented. Daniel Hayes, who had not slept more than a few minutes in a chair near the office, shot upright, instantly instincts honed by years of vigilance slamming into place. Before any of them could speak, Sam Rodriguez's voice crackled through the intercom, tight and controlled, but edged with urgency. Main gate breached. Multiple intruders, armed. Emily's face drained of color. Claire swallowed hard, fighting the instinctive surge of panic rising like fire in her throat. Daniel looked at both of them, his expression hardening into something fierce and unyielding. "Stay together. Do not separate for any reason." They raced down the hallway toward the basement where Sam and his security team were already forming a defensive perimeter. On the main security monitor, the screens flickered between camera angles, 6 men in tactical gear moving across the grounds with coordinated precision. They carried rifles. Their faces were hidden behind black visors. These were not burglars or thrill-seeking intruders. They were soldiers, professionals, men who had been trained to neutralize obstacles quickly and without hesitation. Sam turned to them, his posture rigid. "Safe room. Now." He herded them down the narrow staircase and through a reinforced steel door hidden behind a panel in the wall. Inside the safe room was compact, but heavily fortified concrete walls, a filtered ventilation system, an independent generator, and a bank of surveillance monitors showing every corner of the estate. Sam sealed the door behind them, locking himself and 4 other guards outside to hold the attackers back. Claire pressed her hands to the cool concrete wall, struggling to breathe. Emily's hands shook as she hovered near the screens. Daniel stood between them, trying to sound calm, even as dread coiled in his gut. "They are after the phone's data. They know Olivia gave it to us. They cannot risk it reaching the FBI. On the monitors, the intruders moved like shadows. Two cut power to outlying sensors. One planted a device near the glass corridor. Another knelt by the basement entrance, attaching a small, blinking rectangle to the door. Emily's voice cracked. That is an explosive. Claire felt the cold seep into her bones. Daniel clenched his fists, wanting to tear the screen apart. Sam and his men appeared in the hallway, taking cover behind stone columns. Muzzle flashes erupted silent on the monitor, but terrifying in their intensity. The attackers responded with brutal efficiency. One guard went down, another staggered, but kept firing. Sam barked orders, dragging his men behind better cover. Claire could not tear her eyes away. They are going to die because of me. No, Daniel said sharply. They are fighting because they believe in protecting you. That is different. But Claire did not look convinced. Guilt carved itself into her expression, deep and raw. The intruders moved closer to the basement door. The blinking device glowed brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth. How long do we have before that thing detonates? Daniel picked up the emergency phone and dialed 911, forcing his voice to remain calm as he reported the attack. The dispatcher told him the nearest police unit was 3 minutes away. He looked back at the screen, but 3 minutes was too long. The explosive would detonate in less than 1. Claire stepped closer to Daniel, her voice breaking. If this is how it ends, it is not, he said firmly. Not today. But even he could not see a way out. They had no weapons, no exit, no chance of outrunning men trained for these operations. The safe room was a fortress, but even fortresses had limits. On the screen, one of the attackers raised his hand, signaling to detonate. And then everything changed. A new image flashed onto one of the cameras, flashing red and blue lights streaking across the driveway. Police cruisers. Then more. Then a dark armored vehicle barreling through the open gate. A SWAT truck followed its reinforced grille, slamming into the intruders' getaway vehicle. The mercenaries froze, hesitating. Another camera lit up as tactical teams poured across the lawn like a tide of authority. Emily gasped. How did they get here so fast? Daniel's breath caught as realization dawned. Olivia. She must have been intercepted, or she told someone, or his thoughts scattered when the basement camera flickered, showing the intruders retreating, fading into the shadows as quickly as they had arrived. Within minutes, SWAT secured the grounds, neutralizing remaining threats and disarming the explosive device before it could ignite. When the panic room door finally released with a metallic hiss, Daniel stepped out first, shielding both Claire and Emily by instinct. Officers guided them through the chaos, past shattered glass, spent cartridges, and the lingering smell of gunpowder. A tall man in a dark jacket marked Federal Bureau of Investigation approached, flipping open a badge. Claire Whitman, Daniel Hayes, Emily Hayes. I am Special Agent Ryan Cole. You are safe now. Claire nearly collapsed with relief. Daniel steadied her. Agent Cole continued. We have been monitoring Victor Kane and Titan Energy for several weeks. Tonight, when a taxi driver reported transporting a woman matching Olivia Brooks' description toward the Canadian border, we moved immediately. She's safe, under protection, and she has agreed to testify. Emily let out a shaky breath, tears of both fear and relief clinging to her lashes. Cole went on. With the phone data Brooks' testimony and this attack, we arrested Kane and multiple Titan Energy executives within the last hour. This conspiracy is over. Claire closed her eyes. Daniel exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. Emily turned to both of them, her voice trembling but steady. We are really going to win this. Really going to win. Daniel looked at Claire, seeing strength returning to her eyes, fragile yet fierce. No, he said softly. We already have. The night around them was still trembling from violence and rescue. But inside that chaos, something unbreakable had taken root, a truth powerful enough to stop even the darkest machine. And the war for justice was far from over. The next battle would take place in the one arena Daniel knew better than anyone. The courtroom. The wind along Michigan Avenue carried the restless hum of the city, a pulse of possibility moving through streets Daniel Hayes had once cleaned in silence before dawn. Now he stood at the window of his small but determined law office, watching the late afternoon light turn the glass towers gold. Chicago felt different to him now, not because the city had changed, but because he finally walked through it with his head lifted instead of lowered. For 15 years he had carried the invisible weight of exile, the quiet ache of a purpose stolen from him. But as he leaned one hand against the window, he felt something unfamiliar rising within him. Peace. Behind him, papers rustled. Emily Hayes sat at her new desk, buried beneath case briefs, her hair pulled into a messy knot as she read with relentless focus. She had thrown herself into law school with the fire of someone who had seen injustice up close and understood the cost of silence. Occasionally, she glanced toward her father, studying him with a mix of pride and quiet amazement, still adjusting to the idea that the man who once swept courthouse floors was now becoming a symbol of justice in Chicago. The door opened softly, and Claire Whitman stepped inside, carrying the calm presence she had begun to reclaim day by day. Her companies were rebuilding her reputation stronger than ever, but Claire moved with a gentler rhythm now, less steel, more intention. She paused at the doorway, taking in the sight of Daniel at the window, and Emily immersed in her work, and she smiled. The kind of smile that comes not from victory, but from survival. "Everything all right?" Claire asked. Daniel turned and the soft lines around his eyes deepened. "Better than all right. For the first time in years, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Claire joined him by the window, her shoulder brushing his. The city stretched below them in sprawling lines of light, a maze of lives and stories, some broken, some rising. She rested a hand on his arm, grounding him gently. "You did not just win a case, Daniel. You broke a machine built to crush people like us." He chuckled softly. "People like us. A billionaire and a janitor." She held his gaze. "Survivors," she corrected, "and maybe something more." He felt the words settle deep within him, warm and steady. For years he had believed that his life had ended the day Titan energy destroyed him. He had thought redemption was a fantasy reserved for other people. But Claire, with all her brilliance and vulnerability, had offered him a truth he had been too afraid to accept, that healing was possible even after the world had stripped him bare. Emily suddenly looked up from her desk, interrupting the quiet. "Dad." "Claire, come here." Both turned quickly, the urgency in her voice unmistakable. Emily pointed to her laptop screen. "The Whitman Justice Fund just got approval to expand statewide. We could take on twice as many cases. People from all over Illinois are reaching out. They want help, Dad, real help, and they are asking for us." Daniel felt a rush of emotion so sharp it almost stole his breath. Not long ago, he had struggled to fill a single hour of his day with purpose. Now the world was knocking at his door, asking for him to stand where he once stood, with pride. Claire rested a hand on his back, sensing the shift in him, the way hope began to shape his posture. "So what do you think?" Emily asked, her voice a mixture of eagerness and earnestness. "Are we ready for this?" Daniel stepped closer to her desk, placing a hand on the back of her chair. We are. But let us never forget why we started. Not for fame, not for applause, but for the people who cannot fight alone. Emily nodded, her eyes bright with conviction. Claire walked toward the center of the office, letting her fingers trace the edge of the newly assembled conference table. She had spent so much of her life wielding power through innovation and strategy. Now she wanted something simpler, something truer, impact measured, not in numbers or patents, but in human lives changed. She looked at Daniel and Emily, at the space that had already begun to fill with purpose, and felt a rare sense of belonging. I think, Claire said softly, that this office will become something extraordinary. Daniel crossed the room to her. Not because of me, he said. Because of all of us. A quiet moment settled among them, gentle and warm. Outside the window, the city lights blinked awake, glowing like constellations scattered across the earth. Daniel watched them flicker and felt the echo of his past stir within him, not with pain this time, but with understanding. His story had never been one of failure. It had been a long pause before a new beginning. Claire slipped her hand into his, her fingers entwining with his as naturally as breath. Emily turned back to her work, smiling at the sight of them. The world had tried to bury Daniel Hayes. Instead, it had planted him. And now at last, he was growing again. In the end, Daniel's journey reminds us of a truth every expert in justice and human resilience understands. Systems can be corrupted, power can be misused, but integrity in the right hands becomes a force strong enough to realign the world. His story is not just about winning a case. It is about reclaiming identity, restoring faith, and proving that even those pushed to society's margins can rise to confront giants. If this story moved you or made you think differently about courage and second chances, we invite you to like and subscribe for more narratives that challenge assumptions and celebrate quiet heroes. And before you go, share your voice in the comments with a simple phrase that captures your belief in justice stands strong.